So I will kick it off then with the first question, because for those of you in the chat so far, it looks like we've got a mix of brand new and people that have been practicing the Bladder Meridian in the challenge or the Masterson method. Can you just give us a quick explanation of what is the Bladder Meridian technique?
Okay, so the bladder meridian, a quick explanation. Bladder meridian technique is a technique where you run your fingers very, very lightly down the bladder meridian line on the horse. You can do this anywhere on the horse, but we use the bladder meridian. It's traditional Chinese medicine meridian, just as a pathway to start, a place to start. But you run your fingers very lightly and slowly down this line, and you watch the horse's eyes and face for a subtle change in behavior, such as a blink. The blink is the most common. And if you're not putting pressure on the horse and you're going very lightly down there, when you come across an area of tension, there will be some sign that the horse is feeling that tension. And it's usually a blink or the lips twitch or something. If you stay there long enough on that spot, the horse's nervous system will go from protecting that tension and guarding against it to releasing it. So the principle is the horses, they survive by blocking out pain and discomfort and tension in the wild. That's how they survive. They just try to block it out and keep on going. If you don't use any pressure, don't give them anything to brace against, and you search lightly, they'll tell you with some sign that they're feeling something. And if you stay there light enough, long enough, and don't put pressure on them, the nervous system will go from guarding it to relaxing it. And when they relax it, they'll give you another response or sign, such as a lick and chew or a yawn, there are a list of responses. Basically, they're just changes in behavior that correlate with what you're doing with your hand. So the bladder meridian technique is a way to gently search and find where your horse might be holding tension and to allow him the chance to start to release it.
Now, I know we always get asked this a lot from students that are in the gentle body work course. When you're doing this, is it that you're looking for correlations of places along the bladder meridian where the horse responds or reacts to something of where they might be holding tension?
Mm-hmm. It's a search and response. I call it search, response, stay, release. Search, when you get a response, you just stay there and wait until the nervous system starts to relax and let go. And then you'll get a release, which is a larger response.
And do you, because sometimes I think people are looking for, okay, well, if I get a response here, it means something in this part of the body over here is going on. Do you think about it in that way, or do you think about it differently, just really looking for helping the horse release that tension without needing to figure out exactly why and where?
Yeah, if you the horses, there are so many interconnections in the horse's body, but you're bringing their awareness through the nervous system of tension, and the tension likely is under where your hand is or your fingers are, but it really, I think you're working with the nervous system and the fascia, which is highly innervated in the body, and it kind of interconnects the whole body. So you may get a response somewhere, and they're releasing tension in that area. They're telling you there's tension there, but it may be releasing tension in other areas, or they might start to feel it in other areas too. But
Yes.
it's funny because often, like for example, if you're working in the lower neck area, and you get a response and you release tension there, if the horse has tension up in the groin area, which is connected to the sternum, he'll stomp his hind foot or maybe kick his foot up towards his belly. So if you learn to look at the whole horse, the start is just looking, search, response, stay till you get a release. But if you start paying attention, the horse will tell you in other areas of the body where he's holding tension, and he'll start to release it.
It's one of the things that I think it makes the Masterson method really special and really accessible, that you can do something like you're doing now with the challenge, because it doesn't take an advanced level of horse anatomy or massage technique to do this. What do you think is the most important thing for us as we're practicing this to do or not do?
The most important thing to do is nothing while you're waiting. So
Often the most difficult.
it's the hardest, for humans. So you learn how to run your fingers very lightly. Like barely touching the hair and watching for a subtle response, such as blink or lip switch or something. And then you find one and then you stop and you wait. You have to wait there and just keep the horse's attention on that spot long enough for his nervous system to start to go from guarding to letting go. So that's the part that's the hardest. Sometimes we have expectations, or we start to nothing's happening. So we rub it or we push on it, and then then the horse can block that out. It interferes with them feeling, their nervous system releasing it. So the hardest part is to do nothing and wait to see what happens. And it's an experiment with every time you do this with the horse. It's an experiment. You're asking where they might be holding tension when they tell you there's tension there, and you're waiting to see what happens. Maybe nothing will happen, or maybe you'll get a huge release. Maybe they'll shift weight from leg to leg, because if you're releasing tension up, you start in the pole. When you release tension in the pole, it releases tension in the sacrum. So that might relax the hind leg. So it's always an experiment.
Yes. And we got a question in from Janet that said, can you describe where the bladder meridian is located? And we'll also post a reference video where you're demonstrating this on a
Yeah.
horse too.
So I don't do traditional Chinese medicine, but when I started doing this, I was shown where the bladder meridian is, and I started searching on it. It's an energy meridian. So it's not actually on the surface. It may be deeper in the surface, but the line you're following starts, um, well, the best place to start is right behind the ear, right behind the pole on one side. It runs down each side of the spine, a couple inches off the top line of the spine on each side of the spine. So you'll start up behind the ear by the pole, and slowly go down that side of the horse a couple inches off the top line. And then when you get down to the croup, you're going to split off and go down the rump and aim for that line between the hamstring muscles. They call it the poverty groove. So you'll go down over the rump and then follow that line between the muscles on the hind leg and follow that down. And there's a groove that goes over the hock on the side of the leg, over the hock. It basically follows grooves from there down to go over the fetlock, and it ends on the coronary band of the hoof, towards the back of the hoof there. So that's the general area. There's more complicated versions where it branches off somewhere up on the rump, and then it actually starts over the eye, at the back of the eye, and goes up between the pole and the ear. But so you could start over the eye and go over between the pole and the ear, but just to basically follow that line from the pole a couple inches off the top line is the best description. And it could be, don't worry that you're right on the line or right on the meridian. If you're using a couple fingers and you're anywhere in the area, the horse will feel it. So you don't have to worry too much about, you can't do it wrong, that if you're not using any pressure and you're going slow enough. So some people worry, well, am I right on the bladder meridian line? It really doesn't matter that much as long as you're following that in that general area.
Yes.
Mhm.
So I want to go to some of the questions that came in before our call today. And there's two of these questions that I think show the opposite kind of responses that can happen with horses. The first one was, what if the horse refuses to participate? They're moving around, they won't stand still, etc. How do you
How do you
continue, or
handle that?
do you continue?
Yeah, so if your horse is just standing there when you start, and then you start doing this and the horse gets uncomfortable, it's because you're bringing his awareness to some discomfort in the body. And that's part of the process of releasing it. So let's say your horse is just standing there, and then you start this and the horse starts to get anxious and move around. That's a sign he has tension, and he's feeling it, and he's a little uncomfortable. Um, to me, that's a sign he needs it. But how you handle it is important. So let's say you start. Sometimes you put your hand up by the pole and your horse is head shy. He doesn't even want your hand near the pole. Well, he's head shy for a reason. They don't just pretend to be head shy. They're head shy because of discomfort in the pole. So, or it might start when you get farther down the neck towards the wither. But whenever the horse starts to get uncomfortable, there's a couple things you can do. One is slowly back. Well, let's see, have to get the angle right. Slowly back your hand away. Say you're up here and he's fussing and fidgeting. Slowly back your hand away until he stops fussing and fidgeting, and do it from whatever distance that is. You're just keeping his awareness on it. You don't have to be actually touching it. So one thing is back off till he's more comfortable. Another thing you can do is skip that part and go farther down the body to another place and start there. Just go down till he's more comfortable. because you don't want the horse to be so uncomfortable that he can't let go of it. So you have to either soften it by making it farther away or go somewhere easier for the horse. And then often what happens when you finish, if you go down, say, to the back and they're more comfortable, by the time you're done with the bladder meridian, often you can come back up to where they were uncomfortable. So basically either back away or go somewhere else on the horse. And don't be too intense about it. If we have an agenda in our mind of, okay, we're going to fix this, or I'm going to see where my horse has problems, they pick up on that, and then some horses will be uncomfortable. And every horse is going to be different. So don't be too intense about it. Just it's an experiment. Um, does does that answer that question, do you think? There's a couple of practical things to do, either back away or go where it's more comfortable for the horse on another part of the body. If your horse absolutely will have nothing to do with it, then you need to stop. Don't try to make anything happen. You might come back tomorrow. Here's another thing will happen. That's happened before where the horse absolutely won't let you touch him. And you've brought their attention to something they've been guarding, and they'll release some of it during that process. And you might come back tomorrow and they'll let you do it.
And Holly just asked a really good question about where you want to practice this. Should the horse be on cross ties or free to move around?
Well, you can do it in the cross ties. I just don't like the horse to feel trapped. If your horse is comfortable in the cross ties, do it in the cross ties. I like to work in a stall, and I can just let them, throw the lead rope over their neck, or sometimes I'll just do it without even the halter on. And they'll have room to move around, but I can move with them, And sometimes you can do it out in the paddock or the pasture, but you have to do it very lightly, and and very slowly, and the horse will get uncomfortable and might walk away, and then he'll come back again. So it depends how much, freedom you want the horse to have. But I don't want them to feel trapped, but I like to be able to, I call it keep them in the neighborhood. So in a stall is a good place. But if your horse is comfortable in the cross ties, do it in the cross ties.
So one of the questions that came in early that's on the other side of this from the horse that doesn't stand still is we had a participant said that her horse nearly fell asleep while doing the bladder meridian. What significance does that have?
That's good, probably, because they're letting go of some tension, and they'll drop their head, and they'll just, some horses have been holding on to this tension for years and years and years. It could be physical tension from pain or discomfort. It can be just fear or emotional tension, or not trusting humans. A lot of rescue horses or horses, Mustangs or horses off the track. They have this wall of, they'll put up with us, but they associate us with a lot of discomfort. So sometimes that's the attention that they're letting go low of. But when the more they relax, the better. As far as I'm concerned, I think it's great when they just and all of a sudden they let go of this certain level of fear or physical tension, and they're just like, it's like a new horse sometimes. Yes. And every horse is different, they'll have different experiences. They'll have different tension patterns in their body, and there's body types too. If you have big, heavy draft horses, they're going to be a lot more stoic, for example, often than, a young Arabian, or so their body types are different too.
Yes. We're getting so many good questions in here too. So I want to first try to ask the ones that are maybe more general to give a more full picture of, what the technique is. And then we'll go into some of these more specific techniques.
And you can put a timer on me if you want, because once I get going, sometimes it's hard to stop. So you can make a sign or something like blink. I'll notice that if I'm going on to. Yeah, I'll stop.
So Vicky asks, should this be done before or after working the horse?
So in general, any of the techniques we use work better when the horse isn't warm or hot. So, if they're warmed up, it doesn't work as well because their nervous system's more active. So when they're nice, quiet and cooled down and calm is the best time to do it. So before they work. But there's a caveat to that. If you do too much before a horse goes to work, they may feel a little off and discombobulated because they have to have time to process. If you make any big change in the horse, their nervous system has to have time to process it. So the best time wouldn't be for the first time just before a dressage test. It wouldn't be the best time to do it. But generally, before they're warmed up is the best time.
And with doing the Masterson method when there's been an injury, Elisa asks, how bad or old of an injury could this help?
The main you don't want to do work on a horse that has a current like in the acute phase of an injury. The horse's body has to have some time to heal. So if there's any inflammation, just as a general rule, the best time isn't to do it if there's inflammation from an injury. So depending on how bad the injury is, you want to give it a little time to heal, a week or two or whatever. So say they've strained a flexor tendon or something, you need to give the body a time for the inflammation to go down. A bigger, as big a part of that is compensation for an injury. If a horse has had an injury in the past or an old injury, they've been compensating for it. Maybe it's even healed, but their body was compensating for it while it was painful. And so they'll create what I call unilateral tension in the body, compensating more on one side than the other or on a diagonal. So the tension that they've been using to protect it for however many months, years, whatever that they've had the injury is almost as important as the injury itself, maybe more sometimes. Horses can have been compensating for a groin injury or a lower leg injury or even a larger injury, a trailer accident or running into a fence or going over fat backwards or on their side, and they might be fine at the time. They'll move fine because they're programmed to not show it. They can't just get up and start limping and complaining because they go up on the menu. So they might look fine at the time, but those bigger accidents and injuries, they show up much later in the body. And sometimes the lighter you go, the deeper they'll release deeper tension from those old incidents.
It's fascinating how the body does that. I mean, we know
Mm.
obviously our human bodies do the same thing.
Yeah, yeah, it shows up
Yeah.
later, and horses protected even more because they don't really have any other option. We have another option. We have lots of other options. We can call the doctor. We can complain and bitch and moan about it. We can, choose to just cover it up like a horse does. But it's there. When the horse, they don't have the option. The only option they have is to try to continue to survive.
Yes. Melissa asked a good question. How do you make the distinction between fidgeting, reacting to flies, etc., to reactions to the technique?
Yeah. So if you're looking for the blink, or you're looking for any, subtle change in behavior and there are flies around, it's hard to tell sometimes because they'll blink because of a fly or they'll stomp their feet, or swish their tail. So you want to look closely, like, let's say you're doing the bladder meridian and there are flies around and you're doing it, you get a blink. And so you don't know if that was you or the flies causing that. Well, you can go back a few inches ahead and go slowly over it again. If you get a blink at the exact same spot, then that blink was a correlation with what you were doing and not the fly. So that's one way to look at it. Sometimes the horses will have flies on their legs and on their face, and they're not bothered by them at all. But then all of a sudden you find something and they're bothered by the fly too. That also happens. So just repeat what you were doing. And if you get a blink at the exact same spot, then they're feeling something. After you do this for a while, you start to notice when it's a fly and when it's not. But that's the best way at first to tell.
Mm-hmm. Mandy put in the comments, it's been taught the lack of patience on the human part is the biggest barrier to success. How should you go about if the horse seems to keep releasing from the same spot? I.e., my horse seems to keep releasing, my horse seems to keep significant tension in the jaw pole area.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like I could stay there for hours versus continuing and
Mm-hmm.
being able to do along the whole body.
Yeah. So it comes off in layers, so every time you go over that area, you might get releases. But I think the most effective way is don't do too much on that spot. And we have kind of a rule or a guideline when we're doing any technique on horses. You only want to make an improvement. You don't try to fix anything. So if he has tension in the TMJ and the pull area and you get a release there, move on and go on and do the rest of the body. And then come back next time and start over again, and don't get stuck on one spot, because the nervous system can only handle so much releasing in one spot. Another thing is that spot's also connected to other parts of the body. So tension in the pulling atlas creates tension in the sacrum and the sacroiliac. So it helps to get some release and tension up here in this case, and then go on down the body and then see what else releases along the way that might be helping this let go. So don't get stuck on one spot. Don't get too focused on trying to fix one spot. Another thing, sorry, I'm going to keep on going. Another thing, the horse picks up on your agenda. If your agenda is, I'm going to fix this spot, they pick up on it and then they brace internally some more against that. So best thing to do is make an improvement, move on, and then come back and make another improvement.
We've got a few questions on this from Kelly on Facebook, and also I saw a question come in here from Amy on Zoom. How often should you practice this technique? Is there a too much?
There is a too much. If you're doing the Bladder Meridian, you can do some every day. You might spend 20 minutes every day, on the horse. And that'll be okay because the horse has time to process that overnight, for example. But if you do a lot, if you spend an hour doing this on the horse one day, you come back the next day, the horse might not let you touch him, or he might just not respond. He might just kind of go dull because the nervous system has to have time to process any changes. So it depends on how much change has occurred. The horse will tell you if you're doing too much. If you come back every day, you're doing an hour, do it every day, or the horse will just stop responding. Or like I said, he'll be really uncomfortable and pin his ears. So the horse will tell you. If you're working on, like say you're doing the whole horse head to tail, and you're doing, for example, all the techniques that you've learned in the horse class, and you do that one day and you come back the next day, you try to do it again, that might be way too much for the horse. But if you just do a little bit every day, they can handle it better.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So Wynn put a question in about kind of, I'm going to paraphrase here, Wynn, how to maybe build a schedule in here. So is it better to do one longer session a week, to do a little bit each day? She said, what's a nice frequency for the long run?
It's what the best answer for that is do whatever the horse tells you is working. If you're doing too much, they'll tell you. I guess I prefer to give a few days between anything I do, unless I'm just doing a little bit of Bladder Meridian. So when I used to go out and, I drove my horses and harnessed them up, I groom them. And then I do a little Bladder Meridian on the areas where I knew they held tension. Annabelle, my mare, she was insulin resistant, so her feet would get sore, and so she would usually be tight in the pole and in the shoulders. So, every time before I did any harnessing up, I'd do a little bit there, do a little bit of work on her pole, and then I'd harness her up. So, but that wouldn't be every day because I wouldn't drive her every day. I would say every couple days. If you're just going to go out and spend time with your horse, every couple days would be good. But don't be afraid to try to do it a little bit every day, and they'll tell you when they need a break or need more time to process.
And Georgia asks, if my horse is very responsive and it takes me 15 minutes to just get from the head to the withers, should I stop there for the day? And I'm going to add on to that question and say, do we always want to be doing both sides evenly, or is it okay to do a part and then just stop and say pick up on a different part or the other side another day?
Yeah, you don't have to do both sides evenly. Just it's better not to do the same side never do that. Not ever do the right side because you're on the left side of the horse. But there's no rules. Like if you do one part today, you can pick up another part tomorrow and then do the other side, in a couple days. Was there a first part of that was the first part, or was that the whole question?
The first part from Georgia was, if my horse is really responsive and it takes 15 minutes to get from the head to the withers, should I stop there?
So I think the best answer is every once in a while, step back and take all the pressure off the horse to see what he has to say. So if you're spending 15 minutes between the head and the withers, I would say the horse probably needs to release something, but you need to step back if there's that much going on. So it's a good rule of thumb that, you know, every few minutes, or, you know, I don't know, just pick a time, just step way back from the horse and take all the pressure off the horse and see, I call it, see what they have to say. Because they, you know, like we step back a little bit from the horse and we think that's fine because with a human, you know, this is fine distance. With a horse, a quarter mile is a nice distance. So if you step back every once in a while, just step way back and just see what the horse has to say and give it like a couple of minutes, because the horse will stand there a little bit and then it'll start to feel stuff, that it'll start processing stuff, and you'll see its eyes twitch, and then he might drop his head a little bit, and you'll think, okay, that's good enough. And you wait like another 30 seconds and you might start to yawn like crazy. So in that case, the last, I don't remember her name, but from the head to the withers, um, if you had stepped back after maybe 5 minutes to give your horse time to feel what was going on, you might have gotten some big releases. So that's just something to be aware of. Um, Sometimes they're just holding on to it and waiting for a chance to let go, but you need to like give them a break. And can I add one more thing to the how often? Because the how often depends on what you're like, how often can you do it as opposed to how often should you do it? So how often can you do it was one question. How often should you? If you have a horse that he doesn't have a lot going on, you know, you might ride him a couple times a week or maybe on the weekend go for a trail ride, and physically he doesn't have any major issues, then you might only need to work on him once a month, you know, or once a week or once every 2 weeks. But if you have a horse that's in training 6 days a week and competing, you might want to work on them every week or every 2 weeks, depending on what's going, how much stuff they have going on in their body. You know, a horse with a chronic sore back is gonna, and you're gonna want to work on them more frequently. Or a horse with sore front feet is going to get tight in the pole and the atlas, so you're going to want to work on them more, or just the physical, their job, you know, the being an athlete, you know, you might want to work on them more regularly than a horse um, that is doing physically is doing okay in his job and isn't really strenuous. So
Mm-hmm.
sorry,
Mm-hmm.
sorry, I had to go back to the previous question. Are these
Well,
answers making sense? Because I like these questions because every horse is different, and they have different stuff going on. So you might do one thing, and then something will happen that you just don't know what to do next on this horse. Whereas on another horse, it would be clear. So the question about from the head pole to the wither is an interesting question, because that's not a question I get a lot, you know, and so you never know what's going to come up. It's nice to be able to address those. Hopefully my
yes.
answer wasn't too convoluted for her.
Well, you've kind of been talking about this throughout in terms of some of the ways that we wouldn't want to practice the technique would be using a lot of pressure, you know, going to attack an issue, um, being too much agenda oriented and focused on where, you know, maybe we think the issue is. What are other ways that we could mess it up?
Mess it up. Doing too much. You can't doing too much, you know, or
Mhm.
you can't. You might only mess it up. You're messing it up by it's not as effective as it could be if you were doing it differently. You can't really hurt the horse if you're paying attention to the horse doing this. So you
Mhm.
can only do it. You can do it better. So I think using too much pressure, going too fast and not paying attention to the horse are two of those start when you're starting out with the bladder meridian is you're going too fast and you're actually pushing or um, so that would be the first thing that probably will mess it up in the sense that it won't be as effective. So slow down and you go very light. And another thing that helps is it's not just air, I call it air gap pressure, barely touching, but if you do it with a hard hand or a soft hand, the horse can feel a difference. So you say you're watching the eye and you're going down and you think, oh, maybe my hand's too hard. Watch the horse's eye and soften your hand and see what happens. Often you'll see the horse give you a response when you soften your muscles, your own muscles in your hand and your arm. Um, so those would be the main things to mess it up. And then on the other end of the spectrum, not paying attention to what your horse is telling you and doing too much. where they absolutely say, no, I don't want any more, or they go completely dull. And then it's really clear, like there's no blinks, no nothing. Their nervous system is just kind of overloaded and they just kind of
Mm.
shut down. I don't know if any
The
of anybody's experienced that with their horse.
Yeah, I would be curious that put that in the comments wherever you're watching. You were just discussing there about the change that you can make in your hand. What are the levels of pressure? And I know you teach these as one of the fundamental pieces of the Masterson method and in the class for those that are in gentle body work, but could you just go through those here so people have an idea of what the pressure actually is?
Yeah. So we have very light techniques like the Bladder Meridian, which I call search response stay release. Bladder Meridian is in that category. You can do that anywhere on the horse. We have hind end points that where we specific points where we usually search for responses to help release tension in the sacroiliac and in the gluteals and in the hip joint and in the muscles that pull on the sacrum. So those are all search response stay release techniques. So those are air gap. And that's what like I said, is barely touching the hair on the horse. And then the next level of pressure we use for other techniques, more like we have movement techniques. The next level I call egg yolk, the amount of pressure it would take to if you had an egg yolk in your hand and you pushed on it and it just indented the yolk. So that would be like maybe like that, the weight of your finger would be egg yolk. Maybe a slight pressure. And then the next level I call grape, the amount of pressure it would take to squeeze a grape without breaking it, if you were to put a grape here. Then, so we have air gap, egg yolk, grape, and then some of the techniques require even more pressure, what I call lemon, the amount of pressure it would take to squeeze a lemon without breaking it. And then the highest level of pressure I call lime, the amount of pressure it would take to, squeeze a hard lime as hard as you can, actually, that's lime. And each technique, you start with a certain level of pressure, and then you adjust your pressure depending on if the horse is bracing against it. If the horse is bracing against whatever level of pressure you're using, then the pressure is too high. You go back to a lighter pressure. So air gap, egg yolk, grape, lemon, lime, they almost all have to do with food. I don't know why that happened, but they're very palpable, descriptive, using those things. So.
Yes, yeah, it really helps because I think we could all relate to what it feels like
Mhm.
to, feel those foods.
You can relate to those, but some people, sometimes you'll teach egg yolk and they're actually doing, or you teach air gap and they're doing egg yolk or grape, and no, that's not air gap. And then, you say, do you use egg yolk, and then you put your hand on theirs and they're pushing to grape, no. So always be aware that you can always go lighter, and you can also always go lighter while you're watching the horse's eye. And if you're not getting a response and you think you're at one level of pressure, go lighter. And if they blink or soften their eye or drop their head a little bit, then that means you were using too much pressure.
Yes. So there's so many good questions, and I know we probably won't get to all of them in the time that we have, unless we just keep Jim here for the rest of his birthday. But there's this one came in, I think, is really good, and we had kind of been talking about it and then moved to the discussion of preference or pressure. But the what are the kind of differences for doing a draft horse versus a smaller or spirited breed to take into account?
Yeah. So if we're talking about like the bladder meridian or the search response stay release techniques, um, the draftier horses and more cold-blooded horses are often more stoic. And so, but also some other horses. I mean, not just breed. Sometimes a breed like quarter horses are pretty guarded, but some quarter horses are very sensitive. But in general, let's take the draft horses. They're usually very stoic. So you may be going down a draft horse, watching the eye, and nothing's happening, and all of a sudden like one eyelash moves. Well, that's what you're looking for on that kind of horse, the smallest little response. And you're probably going to have to stay a lot longer on those horses too, on the more stoic horses. And if nothing happens after you've waited a while, say 20 or 30 seconds, I usually say when you're ready to move on, wait another 20 seconds and see what happens. But say you move on and you get down towards the hind end of the horse, and it kind of builds up, it's a cumulative thing. So you may get a little response and you wait there, and then nothing happens, and then you move on, and then you get another little response and you wait there, nothing happens. And then when you get down towards the hind end, all of a sudden some horses will let it all out at once. So if you don't get a response with a release with every response you get, don't get discouraged. Don't think it's not working. Just wait and then keep their attention on it for a while and move on, because you'll probably get something down farther down after you're farther away from their head sometimes, if that helps. And then also it just builds up to the point. And then if you're not getting anything, step way back. Like I said, just step back and take all the pressure off the horse. And after about 20 or 30 seconds, or maybe a minute, they'll let it all go. So you have to have a lot of patience and not have too much expectation or an agenda. If you have an agenda, then the horse picks up on it. I'm sorry, the lighter horses. I didn't talk about the more flighty younger horses, or younger or lighter, more spirited horses. Some horses, and it's interesting, after you do this a little while, the Bladder Meridian on different horses, you'll pick up their personality pretty quickly. So you have a really kind of spirited, you have very expressive horses that will blink like at the slightest thing, they'll tell you something's there, but they'll guard it. And then you'll have other horses that are very expressive. They'll tell you the slightest thing and they'll let it go immediately because they're more trusting. So some horses will do that. Horses that move around, I might as well throw this in here because the question might come up. If you have like a horse that's more flighty or spirited or active, or you find a spot where they're uncomfortable and they step away from you when you find it, it's important that when they step away, that you don't let your hand come off. Don't like, if they step away and your hand comes off, then they just learned that's how to get rid of you, in a sense, get you off that spot. And you don't want them to get you off that spot because there's something there that they need to release. So with a horse that moves around a lot, just follow them and try to keep your fingers lightly with them, as they move around. And if they're too agitated, just move on to another spot and come back to that spot again. These are all practical questions and they come up all the time. So if your hand comes off, then they just learned, okay, I can step away again. So try to stay with them. If it's too much, move to another area and then come back later.
Yeah. And we got the same question in from Ro and also from Elisa of how do you see the horse's response when you are in a different place on the body? So Ro said, I have difficulty seeing responses when I'm all the way at the
when
rear
you're down at
working.
the hind end, you can't see. I try, I have longer arms so I can like stand way out there and then see the eye. But another thing, if you can't see the eye, watch for other things. Like sometimes you'll see if you're back at the hind end, you can't see the eye, you'll see an ear move, or you'll see the head drop, just like, like a eighth of an inch, the head might drop a little bit. So it's some subtle change in behavior that's an indication that they're feeling something there. Yeah, the little head drop or the ear moving. Another thing is you can have somebody else tell you what's going on. Another thing that happens is after you do this for a while, you start to just be able to, you can start to tell where they're feeling it. Something will change in their body, like I said, the ear might move or the head drop a little bit, or you'll just you'll like think, you'll just guess, well, maybe there's something here. If you're not sure, just stay there and see what happens. If you think there might be something, just stay there and see what happens. Some horses, it's interesting, like you're on one side and you'll come across a spot and they won't blink on your side. They'll blink on the other side. And there's somebody that's standing there with you, they'll say they just blinked. So sometimes a horse will blink on the opposite side because they don't want you to see it. So it does help to have somebody there with you. Or if you're not sure, just stay anyways and see what happens.
Yeah, that's
or step back and see what happens. Like I said, sometimes they're releasing, but they don't want to tell you till you step back. It's kind of fun after a while to try these different things. It's kind of fun to outsmart your horse.
So I'm curious of all the different techniques that are involved with the Masterson method, and we featured 10 of the core techniques in the Gentle Bodywork program with horse class. With with the Bladder Meridian challenge that's happening right now, why did you choose to focus on the Bladder Meridian, and why is that a good entryway for a lot of people to start practicing this kind of work with their own horse?
I think the main thing is it covers the whole body, so you can kind of get a sense of where your horse is holding tension. If he's extremely head shy when you start, 99.9367% of the time, it's tension in the poll. They're trying to get away from some discomfort. So, it covers the whole from the head to the all down to the hind leg. So it kind of covers the whole body. You may not know that your horse has a sore back or a sore lower back. You may not know he has tension, in the withers, maybe in front of the scapula or behind, where the saddle sits. You may not know that. Or you may not know that they have TMJ. You can just do the TMJ point. So the bladder meridian's a good way to see what's going on in the big picture. It's easy to reach, except when you get down the hind leg. You don't have to do the whole bladder meridian if you don't want to go down the hind leg or your horse is too sensitive back there. Then you can do that later after you've done some other, done the bladder meridian on other parts of the body. They're comfortable enough to let you go down the hind leg. Sometimes you'll go over the hock and your horse will pick up his leg when you go lightly over the hock. First indication that he's got some soreness in the hocks. So that you may not have known about.
So I want to come back and do a few more questions before we close here, but we do have a little surprise to celebrate Jim's birthday. Not only are we doing this call, but we're opening up the General Bodywork program at Horse Class. This is the first time that it's been open since last year, since last
Cool.
September, actually. So it's been a year. And we're opening it up. I will put the link in. And we had a lot of fun creating this. I have followed Jim's work for many years. So honestly, being able to work with you, Jim, creating this program when we did, it was really an honor. This is something that I continue to practice with my own horses.
It's so easy to do, and the other
Yes.
techniques, the techniques that we have on Horse Class, we chose techniques that were accessible, to horse owners to do, like physically or, and some of them are more challenging on some horses, the lateral cervical flexion. If they have a lot of tension in the pole and in the neck, then have to learn how to really soften, So, they're designed to be user friendly. They are user friendly, you know. You don't, like you said, you don't have to know a lot of anatomy. I didn't know any anatomy when I started doing this. I was grooming, hunter jumpers, and a couple of massage therapists showed me the bladder meridian. They did that to relax the horse before they would start massaging the horse. And I just noticed these little blinks, and that I could see, wow, the horse is feeling something under there. And so not knowing not being trained to do anything else, I just waited to see what happened. And a lot happened. So you don't have to worry about hurting the horse with these techniques, because if the horse is bracing and you're bracing, it's not working. So every time the horse braces, you soften with the movement techniques, you soften. And when you soften, that's when they release some of the tension. So we're getting beyond the bladder meridian, but the other techniques that you'll learn on Horse Class are like that. They're kind of foolproof. If you're bracing, it's not working. So you can't hurt the horse. And I also, don't worry about taking up my time. I'm doing what I love doing. So
Good. Then we'll keep asking questions.
yeah,
I have to say, one of the things that I love about it too is I feel from doing this practice, it has definitely made a difference in my riding and my handling. From doing in hand work to really just any handling of horses, because it's a practice of, for one, being softer and being really aware of myself, and two, it's a practice of watching, listening, and responding to the horse. There's so many little signs that they give us about how they're feeling when we ask for different things or do different activities with them, that honestly can be easily missed or overlooked.
yeah.
And doing this kind of work where it's so much about just really going slow, paying attention to the horse, that's a skill that can be taken far beyond just doing
Yeah.
something like the actual technique.
Yeah, it is, because you start to notice the small things, and also you learn patience too. I mean, horses, they'll do what we want them to do if we make them do it, but they won't do it in a way that they feel safe and that they're really getting it. But when you take your time and go slow and step back and give the horse time to process, even if you're training or teaching the horse something, it's the same nervous system. If you step back every once in a while, just give their nervous system, their brain time to process what you just did with them. It's so much more effective. And the other thing is you realize how much more you can do by using softness. I mean, the horse will follow what you're doing if you're doing it softly rather than you making them do it. Pretty soon you're leading your horse around on a big loop in your lead rope and they're following you. They're following the loop rather than following the pressure and the tension, or
Yes.
bracing against the tension.
Yes.
Yeah, and one of our early instructors was a dressage trainer and a dressage judge, and she said it changed the way she rode in her hands and her body.
Absolutely. And it can create such positive associations.
Yeah.
My horse here also has had a pretty rough training in his past, and he tends to be very stoic. It's not that he's anxious externally, but he definitely has a high negative association with people in general.
Mhm.
And I find that doing this work has really changed that. In the days that I go out and I can just tell he's not running away, he's not doing anything big, but he's just braced. So I'll just do some of this work before, or sometimes it's the only thing that I'll do. And I'm noticing it really making a difference in just how open he is and how much more easily he relaxes around
Yeah.
people.
Yeah, it's peeling off the layers of past conditioning. They've been
Yeah.
conditioned to respond to pressure with pressure, and so you can peel those layers off if it's really deep.
Yes.
Um,
Yes, exactly.
mhm.
Yeah. So I put the links in. We would love to have you join us in Gentle Bodywork. And the way that the program works is, again, Jim teaches 10 of the key techniques, and we set it up that you get the lesson from Jim, and then you get a really short lesson from me that just gives you highlights of what to go and practice. And then we've got some additional videos in there where you can see how it's working with different horses and get some more examples.
And
So,
when we were doing that, part of that was talking a lot about what's causing tension in the body and how tension
yes.
builds too. So
Yes.
there's a lot like um, because everything we're working on in the body is caused by something. It can just be
Mhm.
work, their job, or it can be other issues such as saddle or feet or dental issues. So
Mhm.
um,
Mhm.
yeah, so that's a big part of it too is starting to pay attention to what might be causing tension in your horse's body. They're so good at covering it up. We may be doing something that is creating tension and we don't even know it.
Yeah. Yeah. And recognizing that so many of the things that are often labeled as bad behavior or misbehaving are a result of that tension or discomfort that the horse has.
Yeah, they do everything for a
Yeah.
reason. It isn't just to be a jerk. They're not natural jerks. They're doing it because they're uncomfortable or they're afraid or physically uncomfortable or mentally uncomfortable or they just don't understand. That's the only reason they do things. Or they've been conditioned to do bad behavior too.
Yes.
Because they think
Yeah.
that's what they're supposed to do, and we think they're being a jerk. Well, that's how they've dealt with the input they've been getting in the past. It's just
Mhm.
they're just being conditioned. So we
Yeah.
don't want to get too deep into all that, but I think the point is horses aren't out to just be jerks. They're doing things for a reason.
Mhm. Mhm. Absolutely.
One of my favorite Gary Larson cartoons, The Far Side, is there's like three or four cows and they're standing out in the pasture and they're leaning on the fence post and they're chatting and having a cigarette. And one of the cows yells, "Car!" And they all jump down and they graze. And the car goes by and they get back up again. Like that's not how it works with horses. They're not plotting things and there's no they're not planning and plotting against you, at night. So they're just being horses. So.
I've seen that cartoon. I know exactly which one you're talking about.
Yeah.
So let's go take a few more questions before we close here. Helen had asked earlier about a response. My horse will drop his head and chew at certain spots as I'm moving my hand. Is this a response or an immediate release?
Yeah, so like he'll chew, kind of work his jaw and chew. So it's a response and a release at the same time, because anytime you bring the horse's awareness to where it's holding tension, it's going to help them release it. In awareness in a way they can't brace against it. So sometimes they're responsible, they'll drop their head and they'll start chewing, or they'll put their head sideways and start chewing because they're feeling something that they've been blocking out. So it's anytime they're feeling it, uh, they're letting it go. Sorry, I have to do my Dr. Phil impersonation. You got to feel it to heal it. So that's the horses. Anytime you're bringing their awareness to it and they're doing that, they're letting it go. Their nervous system is trying to work it out and let it go. So it's a response and a release at the same time.
Mhm. Just catching up here on your comments in the chat. There was in Facebook a little bit of discussion around pregnant mares, and I know we also had a question that came in earlier around foals. So recommendations or don't do's for pregnant mares and foals.
I guess in general, with a horse, a pregnant mare, um, as a rule of thumb, I probably wouldn't do anything within a month of the due date, because you don't want to start something you can't stop. You want to, but so for me with a pregnant horse, you're just trying to get them comfortable, right? It's not comfortable carrying a foal around in your body. So doing the bladder meridian, I wouldn't do a lot more than the bladder meridian with a pregnant mare, just to get them to relax and be comfortable every once in a while. But too close to the end of the term, you don't want to mess with that. And then there are other horses, like the situation might be, this is a really important pregnancy. It's a very important horse. It's under the vet's care. You really want to get the vet's permission if you're working on a horse that's under the vet's care for something like that. Because you don't want to, some people say until there's a heartbeat, you don't want to do anything with the horse's body. So and then the last 3 months, you don't want to do anything. So if I feel safe the last month or two, just not messing with the mare, just let it. But if there is a vet involved, then you want to get the vet's take on it before
Mhm.
you do anything. Um, Babies, the the same as in training, a young horse has a very short attention span. The younger they are, the shorter the attention span. So I've worked on foals just because I'm standing there and next to the stall, and I'm leaning in there and they come up and I'll do a little bladder meridian on the pole of those learn their rump, and I do a little, or search response stay release in the sacrum area, wherever. And I'll get some blinks and then I'll get a look at you and then they'll run off. So they won't let you do too much, but it's best, to be aware their attention span is very short, whether it's learning or with body work. But I was surprised, this young he was only a week old and he was in the stall with his mom, and I was just kind of leaning over the stall door and his rump was there, and I did a little SRSR on his sacrum, and he was swishing his tail like crazy, and then I just gently tried to lift his tail. If there's a lot of tension in the sacrum, the tail will be very tight down. And it wasn't just, him not liking it. It was like his tail was so tight and he was only a week old. So who knows what happens? Who knows what happens the first week or day, or who knows what could have, in the womb, who knows? But I was surprised how much tension this little guy had in his sacrum. And anywhere you touched around there beyond the hamstrings, it was like, don't touch me there. So um, it's not like they build it up. It's not like they have to be very old to have built up tension. Something could have happened when they're really young. That doesn't have to do with anything to do with, necessarily what we're talking about, except that don't be surprised if you find something in a younger horse, some tension. But go in very, very short, small increments, working with a younger horse. And usually, with a young horse, sometimes if I want to do, I'll try to, I'll pick up the legs to do a leg release, but it's more just to get them used to handling. I can get a horse used to handling the legs pretty quickly because I'm not using any pressure or force. And when they pull, you yield. You don't make them do it. You're just getting them used to the feel of it. So that can be helpful sometimes. That was a little off topic, but the younger the horse, the shorter the interval you want to do. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's going to help. We had a few questions that had come in that I saw coming in throughout the call just about attention spans, young horses, anxious horses. So it was really good to tie that
Yeah,
in.
it's just better to do anxious horse, young horse, any horse, or very extremely uncomfortable with anything, just really small intervals, just
Mhm.
do a little bit and then just give it a break, come back the next day, do a little more rather than trying to do a lot all at once.
Yes. Well, Jim, this has been super helpful. Thank you so much for taking the time out today on your
Yeah.
birthday to answer the questions. Thank you for everyone that has tuned in here. And we would love for you to be able to continue your learning and your practice with the Bladder Meridian technique and many of the other core techniques in the Masterson method through gentle body work. So that's open. Those of you in the horse class community, I'll be sending you more information and the link. We'll post it online. And feel free to reach out to us at support@horseclass.com with any questions that you have. We'd love to see you there.
Yeah, maybe we can do this again.
Yes. Well, thank you, Jim. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank
Enjoy
you.
your birthday pizza.
Yeah, I will. Well, and pizza and beer.
Pizza and beer, of
Yeah.
course.
You have, you're not allowed to buy pizza or have pizza without beer, so it's a state law here. So that's the way
Awesome.
that I don't like to break the law, so it's a state law.
Yeah. Behave
Okay.
well.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.